Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning. Welcome to Ethical Perspectives in the News. My name is Pete Welch, and I'm the moderator on this morning's program. This morning, we'd like to talk to you about what people have been reading in the news about the Keystone pipeline and either the pros and cons, and basically give each of you a little bit better idea what it's all about, why the articles have been in the newspaper. And with us this morning to discuss this topic, first of all, is Professor Leon Tabak, who's the director of the Berry Center for Economics, Business, and Public Policy at Cornell College in Mount Vernon.
That's right.
Good morning, Leon. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
And next with us this morning is Barbara Schlachter, who's a retired Episcopal priest involved in environmental issues here in eastern Iowa. Good morning.
Good morning.
And finally, we have Professor Jerry Schnoor, who's with the University of Iowa College of Engineering. Good morning.
Hi, Peter.
First of all, for our viewers this morning, can we describe what the Keystone Pipeline is, and so that they have an idea of what it is, our topic is that we're talking? Professor, can you give us a little bit of an idea?
Well, the Keystone Pipeline actually already exists, and there's many, literally thousands of pipelines in the United States, and it's one of them. But what's controversial now is an addition to the pipeline, which would greatly expand its capacity, called the Keystone XL, which will allow about 800,000 more barrels per day to come down in through Nebraska into Kansas, and eventually, when it's all completed, to reach the Gulf of Mexico, the refineries there. The Canadians in Alberta are mining this oil material, so-called oil sands, and producing the crude oil, which will, it's actually called bitumen, which will flow through the pipeline.
Okay. And Leon, the research I did is that there's a certain number of phases that are already complete. Mm-hmm. So this is just like the completion of the third phase, and then there's a phase 4. Is that?
Phase 4 is the Keystone XL that he's talking about. And
okay.
So the controversy here, as I understand it, is there's some concern about the source of the oil in Alberta. This is a different kind of way of producing petroleum. And then there's concern about the transportation of the oil on the pipeline. This is a transnational or international pipeline that crosses borders. Another part of the controversy here is that this project is now 6 years old. And so it's been under review and delayed reviews and delayed decisions. So there's a controversy not only whether to go ahead, but how we make decisions of this kind.
And maybe also a little bit, the original path of the XL was through some sensitive ecological areas in Nebraska. But it's been moved a little bit.
Now, wasn't that original path that was controversial through the sand dunes?
It's
Sand hills.
Sand hills.
Yes. Sand hills, which are an ecologically fragile land feature that is subject to erosion when disturbed. And it also is over the Ogallala Aquifer, which supplies water for 2 million people and about 80% of the population in the Great Plains area. So it's a question of not if there is a leak, but when there is a leak, how that aquifer would be affected and what the impact would be on the people who rely on that for drinking.
Okay, now the aquifer itself is there a choice of going around the aquifer?
It's pretty hard to go around it.
Okay.
They've moved the route so it's on the edge of the sand hills. It's still, the people who live there still feel as though that's a very dangerous route.
Okay, are there other oil lines over the aquifer already?
Yes, I believe there are.
Okay.
This would be one more carrying more oil.
And more difficult oil for transporting.
Okay.
Because it's a heavier oil and it needs to be moved with chemicals and with heat and a lot of pressure. And so when you have a leak of this bitumen or dilbit oil, you get a lot of very dangerous residue, and it has a tendency to sink. There have been 2 leaks of this tar sands oil that have been prominent in the news in the last few months. The Mayfair in Arkansas, and then the Kalamazoo River in Michigan. And they're still trying to figure out how to clean that stuff up because it's so heavy. It just goes to the bottom of the water and stays there.
Okay, now, I might not have missed something, but it sounded like you presumed there will be leaks.
I think that's right,
Okay.
because there are leaks in the pipelines in this country about every 3 days, is my understanding. And the first Keystone pipeline that was opened had 20 leaks in the first year, 2010.
Okay, and are you aware of any of the upgrades or the 47 things that they say that have improved on this line? Or are you advocating that since we don't want to have the pipeline, we'll let the railroads do all the carting? And we saw that wasn't very successful, not just but a month or month and a half ago.
Well, my perspective is that it shouldn't be taken out of the ground, that we don't need it. We have enough other energy sources that we can use and develop. We really shouldn't be mining that particular kind of oil.
So we should be beholden to the Arabs that we get our oil from now?
Well, let me just say that I think that our boreal forest that the tar sands comes from is an extremely important way of keeping carbon sequestered, and that's very important environmentally, and that we really don't need the oil. I think if you look at some of the projections about how we are lowering our use of oil and how we can produce solar and wind, that we don't need that. It just needs to stay there.
I agree, actually, that currently we do import more crude oil than we export, but our imports are going down quite rapidly, and our domestic production is going up quite rapidly. This would add another 800,000 barrels a day, and probably we don't need it. I'd also offer as evidence that the new standards on automobiles, light trucks and heavy-duty vehicles as well, that are coming into place right now and will go through 2025, will save more than 2 million barrels a day. So to me, the real secret, the key in Keystone, is to have energy efficiency much greater than we have now. And I offer as evidence that our new automobile standards, which the Obama administration quite deftly got in cooperation with the automobile companies. It was a real victory, I think, for the first Obama administration, actually, is already saving us a great deal. About 3 to 4% in mileage each and every year on our cars and trucks right now. So I don't think we need this oil, in particular this oil, because it's quite dirty. It's dirtier than the domestic crude oil, like in North Dakota, the Bakken Formation, for example. Even according to the State Department, which I would think is a conservative estimate, about 17% more greenhouse gas emissions as a result of the oil sands in Canada compared to our own domestic production. So first, we don't need the oil, and second, we don't need this oil.
Okay, the timing of the call for another 6-month delay, being that it was in April and it was the administration to open or continue public comments for another 6 months, seems strangely timed, that on Good Friday, late in the day, the Obama administration says, oh, let's call off everything and have 6 more months so we can get past midterms elections. Seems strangely political. Does that ring true? Or?
Do you want to take that, Leah?
Well, right. I think this is perhaps my greatest frustration with this whole issue is if President Obama had decided against the pipeline 5 years ago, I favor the pipeline, but this wouldn't have been the deciding issue in my assessment of this administration. This isn't the most important thing to me. More frustrating for me is that we have this procrastinated, delayed decision-making, and the specter of actors laying themselves down in front of the bulldozers, this whole kind of cycle of making decisions in this way, in an unorderly way, a way that's very costly for everybody, that doesn't seem to have much reason involved in it. That's the most frustrating part for me.
I think, Peter, it probably is political, as you pointed out, and I don't know what the ultimate decision will be, but yeah, originally it was supposed to be decided by now, but now another 6-month delay.
Yeah.
So we should say a little bit more about the politics, and that the president is in a tough spot because he has allies on both sides of this issue, and he's trying to please conflicting constituencies.
There's a strong number of Democrats that are calling for this pipeline within his party, and clearly this crosses over the aisle on depending on what state you're in, and it isn't strictly one party or none.
I mentioned that our domestic production is going up, and it is. But one of the most interesting aspects of that is that the United States is now the #1 country in the world in export of petroleum products, refined products. So really, most of this oil will be refined in the Gulf Coast and exported. So it will create some jobs, not a great deal, but some jobs. And the oil companies do pay taxes, and this will definitely increase their taxes. So those are reasons, I suppose, to be for it. But for me, the overriding aspect is how dirty it is, and that if we don't begin to address that and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, climate change is going to become prohibitively expensive.
And 2 of those refineries are actually over in Illinois.
That's true. Again, some already goes over their Wood River, Illinois area.
And Hadala or something like that is the other one. Now, Barb, you talked about the emissions and the things like this. One of the things I saw in the research that I did on this is that as dirty as you consider this oil and as pollutants and everything, compared to coal or compared to the California heavy crude that's currently being used for energy conversion, these oil sands are less emission than coal or California crude. So you don't see that as an improvement to these other things, or you're against anything that puts out emissions?
Well, I think that
because wind and sun can't do all our energy needs.
I think they can, if we invest our political will in making that happen. I think they can. I think it's a process, and certainly the fracking of natural gas has been seen as a bridge fuel to that time. We just need to keep all of the carbon that we can in the ground in order to prevent our Earth's temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. It's not safe to go beyond that. It may not even be safe to go that far. We don't really know at what point there might be an irreversible tipping point. But there are 565 gigatons, supposedly, that we can still burn in fossil fuels before we have that 2 degrees change. And there's 5 times as much of that that's already been spoken for in coal, oil, and gas reserves. And fossil fuel companies want to make money on this. And I think that's one of the real issues, is that this country, other than maybe some tax money, it doesn't have any gain in this whole pipeline, because it's trans-Canada, and I will also say that the Koch brothers own a big share of that, the oil fields there, and that it will provide just a few jobs that, especially in comparison to what wind and solar can produce in the way of jobs as we move into that area of production. And the oil, as Jerry said, is going somewhere else. So, we're just being used by another country and by people who are rather greedy about what they are willing to sacrifice in the way of America's future, the generations to come, what they'll have to deal with when we have unmitigated climate problems. And so I don't see any reason why we ought to be involved with this at all.
And so is it your opinion then that taking these things out of the ground and doing energy conversions is what's warming the earth then, or?
Yes, fossil fuel gases are warming the earth.
So if you ever went back over the history of the Earth's temperature has changed. It hasn't just been necessarily humans burning fossil fuels.
Right.
So change does happen other than
Yes.
our burning fossil fuels.
It does, but
Okay.
if you look at the correlation with the Industrial Revolution and the increased amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, there's 97% of climate scientists believe that it's human-based that is causing the big problem. And the recent United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, said that we have about 15 years to really turn this around. And that's not very long. We've known about this for 25.
Okay,
We haven't done anything.
well, that's, the United
very
States
little.
has done a lot, but having recently been just 2 months ago in China,
Oh my.
it's much worse there
Yes.
than it is here. So,
Yes.
it's we toe the line and nobody else does. There's another. Leon, what do you think? Should, 65% of the American public in the Pew Research are in favor of the pipeline. Should the majority rule and if they think that's the good thing to do?
That's the orderly political process, right? We have a system where we have a set of reviews with a reasonable time to allow for that review, to allow for input from the community. And as you say, we see surveys among Republicans, among Democrats, favoring this pipeline. I take issue, or I express some disagreement here. We're not at a point where solar and wind are going to replace fossil fuels. We're going to be relying on fossil fuels for a long time. Public policies that make fossil fuels scarce or more expensive will cause some minor inconvenience to the world's wealthiest people, but they will ultimately put the lives of the world's poorest people at risk. Right. So
And if the people that are developing this energy or doing whatever are going to take it out of the ground.
it's happening anyway.
Well,
the Canadians are going to do this. So we talk about we, but there's really two countries here. There's we and they.
I think that Canada faces a predicament, though, and they'd like to get it to the West Coast. They'd like to get it to British Columbia and, to export to China. But I think there they face some insurmountable odds in getting indigenous people to agree with the pipeline. So then their refineries are in the Toronto area and the maritime provinces. So this is definitely the best option for them. But again, my position would be if we're not going to begin to curtail greenhouse gases, if not now, when are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And I do believe it's quite urgent. And 97% of scientists agree as well that we're at a point where we've burned so much fossil fuels and they've accumulated, and 70% of those have come from us, the developed world, Europe, Japan, and the United States. So we have a responsibility. You could argue that we've prospered and profited and enjoy a good standard of living because of the emissions we've made. So we've got to, yes, China has to be involved without a doubt, but we have to act first and begin to get some control of our emissions. And actually our emissions are beginning to come down, but we need government. It's not a direct democracy. You said 60-some% want the pipeline, but more than 50% believe we should act on climate change also. And if it was a direct democracy, we'd have some climate change legislation, which is really what we need. We need to send a strong signal into the marketplace that if you use fossil fuels and don't pay for the externalities, if you take oxygen out of the atmosphere and put carbon dioxide back, if we do that, we're going to pay a penalty in the price. And that's going to make fossil fuels much more expensive. They have to be outlawed in this order: coal, oil, and natural gas in terms of their carbon content. And at the same time, it'll make energy efficiency that much more valuable, and solar and wind, by virtue of economies of scale, will become much, much cheaper. So in net, I'm not sure that energy will cost poor people more. And in fact, if we had a government that sent a clear price signal into the marketplace, those people could actually save money. We could have a fee and dividend,
Right.
where the fee that's collected at the wellhead is collected by government and distributed to all people equally. And if you use less energy, you'll make money off of the deal. And if you use more, that's an unsustainability tax. Then you'll have to pay more as well. I think that's what we really need.
We could do another topic on the government collecting fees at the wellhead and then distributing according to government things as opposed to what fairness dictates. But one of the things about the pipeline I see is if it's going to come out and get moved somewhere, is it better a pipeline, or if they go to alternative railroad cars, I would say railroad cars being more dangerous than a pipeline, where you know your area, you know where you do your safeties, and railroad cars, with what happened a month and a half ago, I think would be inherently more dangerous.
I agree that pipelines are, if you're going to accept the oil, but again, I don't want the oil, but if you're going to accept the oil, pipeline would be safer from a human health standpoint for sure. We already had the big train derailment in Canada that basically blew up a whole small town. And there have been several incidents associated with carrying oil by train, which is a relatively new venture. We also carry ethanol from Iowa by train and in truck as well, which
We
could
see
also
we see it leaving Cedar Rapids at ADM.
Exactly.
Well, I think if we don't have the pipeline, there is a better chance that that oil will not be mined. It will be more expensive to move it by rail, and as you said, more dangerous, and that it, once all that is invested in the pipeline, it's going to be pretty hard to turn that off. And so it's a slowing tactic to try to prevent that pipeline from ever being built. I mean, one day we're going to wake up and discover that we really do need to stop producing this oil.
It's been a good run,
Yeah.
Peter. For 200 years, we've had the Industrial Revolution, ever since the steam engine was invented. And it's provided heat for our homes and energy for our clothes and manufacturing and transportation and everything. It's been a good run, but it's got to be over. And that's what we have to get through people's minds, that this is a very serious problem. We're not running out of fossil fuels, not at all, not anytime soon. We're running out of a place to put the emissions. And these are radiatively important trace gases, and they're warming the earth. They're going to continue to warm the earth for at least 100 years beyond the things we're doing today. So this is a serious problem. People have to come to grips with it. And it doesn't have to be onerous or brutally expensive. Rather, this is how we're going to create jobs, wealth, economic prosperity for the future, by transitioning from fossil fuels to energy efficiency and renewables like wind and solar. We've already created 6,000 jobs in Iowa just as a result of wind alone.
Barbara, would it make you feel better about what's going on if you knew that foreign oil suppliers were financing the blockage of the pipeline? Is their money on your side of the argument to block the pipeline?
At this point,
fair?
I think
You'd take money from
whatever is
anybody?
going to stop putting more fossil fuel emissions in the air, they're working on the right side, even if they're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Now, in my research, I found there's a University of Nebraska professor, now retired, his name was Goki, and after 40 years of studying the Nebraska pipelines and the aquifer, he said that it presents a minimal risk. Does that do anything to sway you in your
Well,
at all?
I
And it's been approved by the Nebraska governor and the Nebraska Supreme Court.
oh, they kind of reversed their engines on that one. At first, they were opposed to it. They really sold out the Cowboys and Indians, the new CIA, the Cowboy Indian Alliance. I went to the hearings that were held in Grand Island about the Keystone XL pipeline, and hours and hours and hours of people who've been on the land since it did become part of the United States, plus the native peoples. Heart-wrenching stories about how it's not necessary for this country to allow another nation to use the right of eminent domain to take people's land for this. It is just not in the interest of our national security. It's in the opposite. It's national insecurity to go ahead and make people give up their land for this or have it run through. It threatens organic farming. Even if there wasn't a leak, there's a really good reason not to do it, and that is because of the fossil fuel emissions. But I must say, there's a great love of land out there in Nebraska. Those people who've lived there, they are fierce, and they are certainly making the world pay attention to them. They had this great rally in D.C. this weekend. They marched in with their horses and all of their Native American brothers and sisters, and I must say it's been an exciting thing to watch some real democracy, some grassroots democracy, people getting together.
Well, you could describe a lot of states with what you just said, and Native
true.
and everything else like that. So
Yes.
we've got about a minute and a half left. Any final comments?
No,
Quickly.
I just think the most important thing is that we not expand the use of dirty oil, and this is quite dirty oil. We'd be much better off to use those funds to explore other options, including energy efficiency and solar and wind.
Okay. Barb, any last quick 30-second bite?
No, I think I just would be very disappointed in this country and in the president, whom I worked hard to elect both times, if he approves this pipeline.
Leon, anything?
This isn't the Starship Enterprise. We can't call down to Scotty and order up solar and wind energy in the last 5 minutes of the episode. We're going to be using fossil fuels for a long time. This is not the cleanest fuel, but it's not the dirtiest fuel, and this could help us.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining me this morning. And on behalf of the Interreligious Council of Cedar Rapids, Lynn County, thank you for joining us this morning, and go out and make our community a better place for us all now and tomorrow. Thank you.